Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. As I look at Mark Carney's campaign to become the next Liberal leader and unelected Prime Minister of Canada, I am seeing a lot of cracks forming. I know there is a bit of a culture online whenever you see a poll slightly move up for the Liberals that we all set our hair on fire and think that the end is nigh because, frankly, a lot of these people get more views by being sensational. It's not really going to happen. And this whole video is going to be an explainer why Mark Carney is not going to happen in the 2025 federal election. Maybe he becomes the prime minister briefly, but I don't really think he's in a position to actually win. Yesterday, we saw two liberal ministers just up and say that they're not running for re-election. One of them had endorsed Chrystia Freeland, which may have been an explanation for why they wanted to get out now. But another one of them is an endorser of Mark Carney. So I think they, in their Toronto GTA area ridings, just realize that they're probably not going to get reelected. And even if they do, they're going to be in a pretty small opposition. But I want to just go over some of the big issues with Carney's campaign, and we'll first start off with one of the silliest. And then I want to get into more of the radical policy and how he's obviously just a front for Trudeau's fourth term. Trudeau would be sticking around if he could, he can't. And so Mark Carney is going to step in Trudeau's place and just do everything Team Trudeau wants him to do. But first, actually, I'm going to do this first. Guys, if you like the show, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment on anything you find interesting or things I need to improve on. But the first silly thing I want to talk about is Mark Carney being caught wearing $2,000 shoes while he was taking this very odd photo of him as a goaltender or whatever at some sort of ice rink. Looks really creepy. He has kind of this Mr. Burns from The Simpsons vibe to the way he often acts. But here we have from Morning Buzz report Liberal leadership frontrunner Mark Carney caught wearing Zegna sneakers in recent photos worth over $2,000. And honestly, I don't know why these things are $2,000. Look at those. Like I actually really like shoes. I'm not sure what the hype of these shoes are. They look like they're like safety shoes for like balance, or like he forgot to take off his shoes after getting off a snowboard. I don't get the appeal here. And know what? I feel kind of attacked because I own $2,000 shoes. To be fair, I bought them on a heavy discount, but they are technically $2,000. I own a pair of Victorian button boots, and this story spoke to me because I got to actually show those for once. But yeah, if I ever campaign for something, I'm not going to wear this because it looks really stupid. And by the way, I bought those way before I was ever being sued, so I'm not like blowing money on that. But this is the thing, and again, it's not a serious issue, but there is something about Mark Carney that just kind of reeks snobbish at all times, and I think that it actually is going to be a major problem for his campaign. It was the same problem that John Kerry had when running for president in 2004, same problem that Michael Ignatieff had in 2011. Frankly, it's probably the same problem that John Turner had, the other completely unelected prime minister, had back in the 1988 federal election. And some people have come to me after my last video when I said that Carney would be our second unelected prime minister, and they started pointing at other people like Kim Campbell. Those people were elected in the sense that they were MPs before they became prime minister, because like even Trudeau doesn't get elected prime minister. He gets elected as an MP, and his party has made him the prime ministerial like leader. And so, but Carney is truly someone who, if he becomes the liberal leader and becomes the prime minister, he doesn't hold a seat. He is basically just running the government through recommendation, and that the caucus is going to do what he wants, which really raises the question: what's the point of even electing anyone if it's not even the elected people who are going to be in the important jobs? So, in theory, Carney could become prime minister. He could return everyone from his cabinet who's a MP to just to the backbenches, and then he could just bring in a bunch of random friends of his to be ministers because he's allowed to do that. And unless caucus stops him, in which I'm not even sure if they really have the power to stop him or not, then unless they just voted no confidence in the entire government, then Carney can do whatever he wants. But let's get into some more serious matters. This was a great find by by M Brant 75, and he says, "Guess who?" with an image of the Century Initiative website. The Century Initiative is this absolutely insane organization that wants to bring Canada's population from 40 million people, and it's more like 42 million people as of today, to 100 million people by 2050. That is obviously stupid. They have this whole section up here on their website that says, why 100 million? And really, why 100 million? Because cheap labor, because artificial economic growth. It's run by a lot of people who are generally tied in with the government, who would be very benefited by having a lot bigger population, even though each individual will have way less money per capita. We will all be less well off as individuals, but the country's GDP will be doing very well. That's the kind of psychos who work at the Century Initiative. And look, as a speaker for the Century Initiative, they had Mark Carney, chair of Brookfield Asset Management and head of transition investing. Yeah, Mark Carney's a big green guy, although he doesn't usually advertise the fact that Brookfield Asset Management, when he was in charge, invested in a lot of oil and gas pipelines in Brazil and the UAE, but refused to invest in anything in Canada because he believes that Canada should be on a green energy transition, but not the UAE, not Brazil, not Iran, not a lot of these other countries that have far worse environmental standards, worse human rights standards, and all that stuff, because Canada is a rich, privileged Western country that needs to get with the program. The UAE, they can do what they want. Brazil, who cares? This is why this guy is going to lose. There are so many contradictions to him. And this one is definitely going to hurt. The fact that he would support an organization that is just, it's not even like he wants higher immigration as a vague generality because it helps our economy. No, no. He's the psycho who agrees with the idea of getting to 100 million. Just 100 million because GDP, because pump the stocks. It's obnoxious. Your country always needs a good balance between the stock market as well as individual finances. And the thing is, it's good to do that because you're going to make sure you actually will be a better country, more well off in the long run if both those things are balanced. I'm not making an equity argument. I don't care about income inequality. People are going to make different amounts of money because they put different efforts into it. Things just worked out different. We don't need to correct for that. But the country's government shouldn't be worried about the overall GDP more than the overall individual's like economic health. But let's move on to a new issue. Before I get to another Mark Carney thing, I wanted to talk about this because some people are trying to call Pierre Poilievre a hypocrite for advocating for a new military base being built outside of Iqaluit in Nunavut. And this Roddy guy, who is a bigger liberal influencer online, one of these anonymous people, says Pierre Poilievre looks like an idiot right now. And Poilievre back a couple years ago said Arctic ambassador to do diplomacy with who? Santa Claus? And yeah, Dieter McPherson, who's another liberal, says, glad you're taking this seriously. Consular presence in any region is part of the expression of sovereignty. They're saying that this is somehow hypocritical because he opposed an Arctic ambassador because he now wants a military base in Iqaluit. These are two extremely different things, which would have very different effects on Canada's power projection, our ability to enforce our sovereignty. An Arctic ambassador is the type of thing that foolish children who do model UN would come up with. We need somebody who's going to show up to any Arctic conferences there are, or go and tell Russia, you better stay out of our territory. You better not mess with us, or we'll complain. We'll complain to the UN. You'll get condemned. It's like it doesn't matter, guys. The thing you want in the Arctic, if you care about power projection and maintaining sovereignty, is guns, jet fighters. You want artillery pieces. You want ways of shutting down the northern passes, chew the Chinese and the Russians if they start screwing around. That is what you want. These are not similar things. The Arctic ambassador isn't going to come out with their pencil and wag it at a military ship from Russia who's trying to take control of the Northern Passage. And this is why Donald Trump was kind of annoyed with Canada when it comes to what he calls our deficit. Trump is absolutely wrong, and we're going to get to the Trump tariffs probably in another video, but he is wrong about having a trade imbalance with Canada. We ship in a lot of raw materials. Obviously, we're going to export more into the US than the US exports into us, simply because once we are selling raw materials, we're not going to buy an equivalent amount of raw materials from the US. We are far more raw material rich, and we don't do as much manufacturing as the United States in a lot of sectors. And so, like, we buy more manufactured vehicles from them and stuff like that. But the thing is, overall, our raw materials end up sort of creating this imbalance because you need raw materials for everything, but we don't really need to buy an equivalent amount of vehicles. Kind of complicated, but generally he's wrong on that. But what he is right on is that they spend a lot of money. The US spends a lot of money protecting Canada to the tune of billions of dollars a year over a period of time. I believe Trump's probably right. It's been over 200 billion that the US has basically subsidized Canada with when it comes to defense and other things like that. And this, with Poilievre saying we need a base in Iqaluit, is a great plan to calm the waters with the US and say, see, we are taking control of the situation ourselves. We do not resent what you're doing for us and think that we can take it all for granted forever. We have to contribute to our own defense someday. Anyways, another reminder, guys, like the video, subscribe to the channel, do all that great stuff. I'm going to get to that later. I'm going to do that in another video. Someone's advocating that we rip up the Starlink contract. Before I talk about CBDCs, I just want to talk about some of the photos that are coming out of Mark Carney's current leadership campaign. This man is a front runner, and he fills up rooms like it's Jean Charest's campaign or Scott Aitchison's campaign from the 22 conservative leadership race. I was at a Jean Charest event in Calgary. Now, I wasn't supporting him as there was media, but this is what it looked like. It's just a small kind of bar event. It's not that full. You know, it's I guess for a small local band, that's a full group of people. And the thing is, when you actually look around the room at the amount of people with cameras, there's a lot of media here. If you sucked all the media out of this corner over here, what are we left with? Like 100 people? Poilievre, during his leadership race, could casually get a couple thousand people in a room. And this is Winnipeg, which is actually, in fact, a partial conservative stronghold. I think once they start actually trying this guy out in a real race, in like against like Poilievre, it's not going to go very well. And again, I'm going to look up the 1993 polling because I think a lot more people need to see it. All these people are saying, you're stupid if you don't think the Liberals have a real chance now. They're coming back, all this stuff. Again, some guys just want content because it makes for shocking content. That, oh, look, they're coming back. Oh, is Carney going to win? And people click on it being like, oh, my goodness, he's going to win. And then it makes everything seem very, everything seems very intense and newsworthy for a bit. Here's what I had to take this off screen for a second and get the new screen up. This is what the 1993 polling looked like after Kim Campbell took over for Brian Mulroney. Around when the PECs are below the NDP in the polls, that is when Mulroney is getting swapped out with Kim Campbell. And then we see a big run for the PCs. They, in fact, overshoot. They actually eclipse the Liberals late into the election in May, but by November, it's fallen down again. Guys, the exact same amount of time is going to transpire before Mark Carney is actually getting people to put votes in ballot boxes for him. He's not going to be able to maintain this. He's not even in the lead. Maybe he gets a poll that makes it look really close after he becomes leader. But what you should look at, and it's the same for the Conservatives right now, look at the Liberals polling. Let's just start at 90, let's start at 92 or whatever. The Liberals in 1993's election cycle are above 40%, and they dip a little bit into the high 80s, and then by the end of it, they're back up at the high 40s. And I think the federal Conservatives this year are going to do better than just low 40s, simply because they don't have to compete with a big party on their right the way the PCs did with Reform. Really, it was a Reform that was competing with the PCs because the PCs were dying. But it's like, the thing is that they maintain the 40%. If you look at current polling, you will see that it's basically been an entire 2 years of the federal Conservatives at the low 40s to the high 40s. I don't think a bunch of Canadians are going to decide, yes, Poilievre is the right man for the job. I hate Trudeau. But then when Mark Carney runs along saying, hey, we need central bank digital currencies. By the way, the economy should, or the country should have a population of 100 million people, and that we need to intensify the green transition by trying to ramp up energy through green tech. That's not going to get a lot of people to shift their votes. People are already where they're at. Right now, what the liberals are experiencing is a response bias. They are less depressed because Trudeau is no longer the rotting peach of a figurehead for them. And so more people are picking up the phone and saying, yeah, I'm voting liberal. The amount of actual raw number of people in the country willing to vote liberal really hasn't gone up that much. But those people have gone from 60% likely to take a poll to 90% likely to take a poll. Kamala Harris had this. A lot of people have had this, where their polling shoots up because a lot of people are suddenly a little bit more energetic in their camp. And then the camp starts, going back to their normal energy levels. And then they like end up having bad turnout again. Just how it works out. It's politics, baby, all that good stuff. So another thing I need to talk about is central bank digital currency. I've mentioned this in another video. We actually at the National Telegraph were the ones who encouraged Poilievre to take a stance against central bank digital currency. This is a massive gaping hole in Mark Carney's campaign that the Conservatives can exploit. I hope when Pierre Poilievre has that big Canada First rally in Ottawa on the 15th, he brings up CBDCs. I saw Poilievre in Vancouver. I brought up the fact that Carney is in favor of CBDCs. I said that he's basically Mr. CBDC. There are articles where he's quoted advocating that the government needs to get involved in CBDCs or the private sector is going to exploit it. So for the public's protection, we need to have a massive privacy violating CBDCs as the currency of the time. It's obviously stupid. There's no private company who could start a CBDC that the world would start using. It's not an actual regional currency, so it would become kind of like a niche product like Bitcoin or Ethereum. Nobody cares about it. But Carney used the excuse that the private sector, big tech, could exploit it to say that Canada and the US and all these other countries need CBDCs. By the way, do you know a country that's a big fan of CBDCs? China. Because it lets them monitor everything that you're buying, that you're trading, how much they can directly tax you. If they tax you more for doing the wrong things, it can plug into your social credit score. It is a massive problem. But anyways, the thing about this all is that Carney is still Mr. CBDC. Again, there are articles where I didn't say this yet, but there are articles where he advocates for this, saying we have to cut off the private sector. And then the same article will quote another central banker who basically, they're not asked about what Mark Carney said, but they're pitched the same idea that the government should get involved in CBDCs to cut off the private sector. And they're like, no, are you stupid? This is like a massive privacy issue. It's a civil liberties issue to have CBDCs. People should be able to spend cash if they want, use credit cards, use their bank as their interface for saving money. Having the government be your banking interface is a massive problem, because your bank doesn't really have partisans in it. The government does. And the government can decide what charities it wants to crack down on, what kind of behavior it wants to crack down on. So I hope Poilievre makes this a big thing with Carney, that he believes in all this neomania, crazy garbage. And when I say neomania, I mean a mania, a love for anything new technology, new ways of the government being able to monitor you, to be able to make things more efficient that actually makes your life harder, but it makes it better for bureaucrats. So settle down. That's a big thing that they need to be going after him for. And now the second thing is something that the Trudeau government's doing, but they're obviously doing it under the advice of Carney because he's been pushing for this for years. That under a potential energy crisis with the United States, if we get into a trade war with them, that instead of trying to build pipelines and do all this other actually effective stuff around oil and gas to secure our energy future, instead we need to put up spinny windmills and we need solar panels that barely work in the winter, especially if you live in Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Manitoba. No, we should not. That is stupid. That is going to greatly increase the price of energy because, yes, all energy on the energy market that gets sold onto the grid is sold at a flat rate. But green tech companies, solar companies, and wind companies, they get extra money for every kilometer or so that they have to shift copper wire along the ground in order to actually get the energy to these grids. The problem is that it actually incentivizes company because the payout is way better than it would be if you just had a much closer wind farm to the grid, that you're actually incentivized to build a wind farm as far away from the grid as possible and then stretch kilometers of copper wire to get to that grid because you're being paid subsidies that are way better than the actual energy that you're selling in terms of the value of it. That the distance that you're transporting, the same amount of energy is giving you more money, even though oil and gas companies don't get this for having to build pipelines or having to drill or any of this more complex engineering feats compared to green tech. This is why green tech is a scam. Green tech gets literally, like, if it's, let's say, 10 cents a kilowatt hour, 9 cents a kilowatt hour for oil and gas products onto the grid. For green tech, it's like 24 cents. It's like 30 cents. Technically, they're only getting the 9 cents for the energy. But the back end subsidy is making it far more expensive. And the government's been perfectly fine splurging because this is our new green energy future. It's not, it's stupid. It's extreme. This is why Ontario having an 8% green energy mandate on the grid. It was started under Kathleen Wynne and Dalton McGuinty, but has continued with Doug Ford. That 8% of the grid represents like 40%, 50% of an Ontarian's power bill at the end of the month. It's stupid. Anyways, so that's probably it for me today, guys. I think Mark Carney is going to be a massive dud when he becomes a leader. I need to go back and check. I'm pretty sure even Ignatieff had a bump, but he's not going to actually win. And I'm not saying this because I don't want him to win. I'm pretty realistic. I'm willing to say I don't like people who are bad. I'm not always just on Team Conservative. It really depends. But I'm checking it out. Yeah, I don't think the Liberals never eclipsed the Conservatives during the 2011 election, but they did rise after Ignatieff became the leader. Carney's going to perform the same way. Is anyone truly excited over Carney outside of psychotic liberal cheerleaders? No, not really. And image is power in politics. Name recognition is power. Carney probably still has a sub 30% name recognition, maybe 40% if I'm being generous. Most people don't really know him, and there's a difference between recognizing him and trusting him. Poilievre has that trust factor, which is why even in the midst of the Liberals supposedly surging, the Conservatives are still at anywhere from 40 to 44% in the polls. That is a very, very stable majority territory type polling number. The Liberals have mostly been taking their polling gains a couple points from the Bloc and a few points from the NDP. That's really it. And then the undecided numbers have sort of shrunk a little bit. But the Conservative coalition has not had anyone leave it yet. So anyways, that's it, guys. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Hope you like it all. Leave a comment if you can. Really helps me on the algorithm. And I'll see you guys next time.